Hey guys, welcome to my podcast, Her Urban Indigenous Life, hosted and produced by me, Nettie Gould. I created this podcast to leave behind my story for my daughter and future grandchildren. This is my contemporary oral teaching for generations to know who I was and what life was like in my era, the political issues my people faced at the time, and my attempts to help my people prosper. I aim to stop the cycles of historical and generational trauma for my family and, hopefully, others along the way.
She is the earth, she is the sky, she is the life, yeah. She is the light, she is the star, she is the night, yeah. Sacred woman, yeah.
In today's episode, we cover one of the most pressing issues in Indian country today: missing and murdered Indigenous women, also known as MMIW. This is an urgent movement. Native women face violence at more than 10 times the national average over any other race. Native women are 2.5 times as likely to experience violent crimes and at least 2 times more likely to experience rape compared to all other races. You have probably seen some degree of activism via social media. The symbolic images of painted handprints covering the mouths represent the voices of Native women being silenced. Today, I am joined by Emily Washines, who is a Yakama Nation historian, scholar, and MMIW advocate. I am super excited to have Emily and delve into the importance of Native women in leadership roles, conveying the significance of MMIW in academia, and the prosecution flaws within the American Angelo legal system. The intersectionalities of these topics broadly deal with how we interpret solutions to resolve the MMIW crisis. Emily shares her knowledge about MMIW within the Yakama Nation and how it relates to the Yakama War. So let's get to it.
Missing the murder of indigenous women, I'm thinking about this evil. Then I got lifted through all my fists to all indigenous people. I'm tired of you killing our women and men, ain't nothing changed, it's televised. Open your eyes, how women are dying, my words, let me hear your battle cry. My mama raised me to treat the ladies the best, so why do I mistreat them? Look at your mama, your sister, your daughter, now raise your fist now. Would you beat them? So what it's worth? Mother Earth, our women and me are sacred births. On the earth, live on words until I'm leaving up in my hearse. They hate our ladies, they curse our ladies, they rape our ladies, it hurts. They kill our women in front of our faces and racists to make it worse. They're genocide, homicide, police brutality is on the rise. Rest in peace to my deceased, you feasting on the outside. I need no more, then she way mommy that. Get you talk way dog, my dog taught me that. Old I'm a social now, my queen, I'm proud of that. My grandmother regret for the pot of water, man, but mommy that.
She is the earth, she is the sky, she is the life, yeah. She is the light, she is the star, she is the night, yeah.
So I want to thank you for joining my podcast today, and I would love to just pick your brain about some of the work that you've done and kind of answer my curious questions as a up and coming Native scholar myself. So thank you.
I'm glad to be here and be the first guest. It's an honor.
I would love to, just kind of get to know a little bit more about you, but also I really want to just create a voice, for Native women to also make my voice heard and allow my story to be heard so that, my younger sisters, my younger cousins, and other Native tribes can hear this discussion, especially for the younger girls that may be listening to us. So I guess I'll start off. My mom is Sharon Kunakai. My dad is Anthony Gould, and he is Cheyenne Arapaho. My grandparents from my mother's side, from the Yakama side, are Nettie Jackson and Leonard Kunakai. And my grandparents on my dad's side, the Cheyenne Arapaho side, is Myrtle Clausen and David Whiteshield. How about your family tree, Emily?
Yeah, I have a huge family. Even when I say that, I think of even my in-laws because they've just been a part of my life. So I have family on the Yakama Reservation and our territories, as well as even my in-laws in Mississippi or Tennessee area. So it's a large, Washines, Musquita family lineage. I have I'm enrolled Yakama, and I also am Cree and Suquamish. So for those of your listeners that might not be aware, Yakama Nation Reservation is in South Central Washington State, and so I have the opportunity to see my parents, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and a lot of family on a social distance basis, and my sisters. So I don't want to get too deep into my family tree, but yeah, I mean, I'm very close to my family. It definitely is a really strong core and center, and I'm so scared of mentioning anybody because somebody might say, you left out this grandma or this, but if your listeners really have the request, I could definitely circle back on that.
Sure. I guess I have another question, and my brother has an Indian name, and I'm a namesake for my grandma. Do you have an Indian name or a nickname?
Yeah, and I do. I actually, my great grandmother decided that there was this older name that she wanted to split in 3. So it is very unique. Sometimes there'll be dual people that share names, and so to have an instance where it's split in 3 is very unique. But there's variations amongst each name, and there's a lot of reasons and a lot of long story that goes along with that, and a teaching that I continue to grow into. But so my Indian name is Tawai Pum.
What is the meaning of your name?
I mean, the shortest one they say is pretty woman, which when I say grow into, like, clearly, I was a really chubby kid, so to even hear that be a name was interesting. But obviously, there's beauty at all sizes, and but this woman was somebody that really carved and created her own path, and it came with a lot of questioning, like, why would she do it this way? Why would she dress that way? Why would she make these actions? But the path that she walked, everybody watched, even if they might not have understood it or fully approved of it. And so to see, like, my great grandmother and to know her and to know that she wanted us to carry this name was very interesting, because she led a life where she did everything, quote unquote, by the native book or unwritten laws, and very interesting teaching.
Certainly. Yeah, I think it's very important for us, to understand our identity and why our names are chosen. I think that can really help us navigate in this contemporary era, especially, now more than ever, when our language is endangered, and in the 2020 arena of politics, I think it's just so important for us to really kind of remember that piece of ourselves, and just, the understanding of, like, why our names were chosen for ourselves. Especially as Native people. So I just love to ask people about their name and, like, why it was chosen for them. I would like to know just a bit more about your education experience growing up. Did you attend school on the reservation, or did you attend a public school? What was your education experience like?
Yes, I attended a public school on the reservation, the same one my kids actually attend. And I went to the same school district, K through 12. And I know that, they've lived off the reservation for until they were toddlers. And then we moved to the reservation. But my husband has lived off the reservation, growing up. So it's really interesting to hear about different backgrounds where people grow up, what they learn and know. There's some things that, is just inherent when you're here that I didn't know that wouldn't be an obvious to just all Yakamas. And then in talking to him, there's definitely things that I didn't know that's out there in the world. I mean, he traveled a lot when he was a kid, and we're complementary. I think our differences are complementary in that way.
Right, right. And your husband, where did he reside, if you don't mind me asking, if he grew up off the reservation?
Yeah, so he lived in California, New Jersey, and Mississippi, on different parts of Washington. I think Gig Harbor. He was a bulldog, so he graduated as a bulldog over in a little town near Olympia. I'm blanking out on it, even though I went to his 20-year reunion. North Mason. Sorry, North Mason. All 3 or 10 of you that might be listening. But he also spent. I don't know if this experience is for you, and I think it might be. But he spent a lot of summers here with his grandparents. And so that experience really helped shape and cultivate so much of his personal identity, as well as, he danced in the powwow arena for a number of years and got to see so many different reservations or areas.
You just never know, like, how different avenues or different native paths sort of kind of intersect each other in the different perspectives that we gain as Native people by our geographical location, and how that kind of shapes our identity. And I kind of learned more about that with my grandfather before he passed in the summer, because it's important for us to really understand our geographical location and how that develops our interpretations about law, about traditional ways, and things like that. And one thing that he, a piece of wisdom that he gave to me before he passed on was, there are 3 different types of Indian people. You have people from the reservation, you have people from the river, and then you have people from the city. And it's important for us to come together and understand each other's interpretations when we sit together at intertribal discussions. And I never thought about that beforehand. And I guess this is the sort of purpose that why I'm trying to navigate through the MPA program in this way and understand what my interpretation is, and inversely your interpretation, and people who've already kind of been in this arena, and just sort of coming in with that awareness. What are your thoughts about that theory, or that cultural theory?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's something that you can have a different answer depending on the issue. And I really respected your grandfather and the wisdom that he had and held and passed on. I love to hear just those anecdotal things, from people that aren't here anymore. So I appreciate you sharing that. I do think that there is a really big focus on, where you're at and your connections to this area. I think in an ideal world, we would look at where people are at and as a tribe and say, like, oh, wow, how is that? Are they learning a skill set? Are they gaining knowledge that we can, bring back to the tribes in some way and become bigger, better, everything? And I think in some cases that happens. And in some cases, it's looked upon as, like, who are they? How do they know our value? It's questioned. And it's unfortunate to have that disconnect. It's unfortunate to not have a line of service that connects, throughout the nation to all the enrolled members, or to a way that feels like we're building community. But now that we have technology, like even this podcast or people that might be listening, there's different avenues to maybe reach and connect with people that are part of us, or, want to learn more. I think that it's super hard to, I never knew what it was like to ever be questioned about being Native. I just always knew I was Native, and nobody questioned that. But in my husband's experience, and in looking at other people's experiences, that's questioned a lot, and I see how that impacts identity. And and to speak to, the aspects of, people that are along the river in our traditional fishing villages, yeah, there is a different, we'd have 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakama Nation that were confederated in 1855. And some of us had different ways of, doing things. The grandfather you mentioned, and my family as well, have ties to the Klickitat area. And, there's different ways. Klickitats did things a little bit different than some of the other bands and tribes. And so to maintain this tribal or band identity is still pretty strong within the Yakama area. There's things that I would just grow up hearing or knowing, and then, it wasn't necessarily the same with this other person, even though they were Yakama. And I think that can be really largely misunderstood outside of the tribe and even inside of the tribe, because it's not anything that we really write down or talk about in a great deal.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess I'm sort of beginning at the narratives that my grandparents taught me, and then kind of moving towards the contemporary discussions that we're having. But one legend that has led me here, or throughout my life from like childhood to womanhood, is the legend of stick people. My grandmother always brought that up, whenever, I had this, I guess, I was a tomboy as a kid growing up, so I wanted to keep up with the boys. I wanted to play basketball with the boys. I wanted to play outside when, and just, keep up with my older brother. And my grandmother always taught me that, girls have certain rules that we have to follow. And that was, we aren't allowed out at night because of stick people, and we'll get taken, and, I won't ever be seen again. Like, she would tell me things like that. And as a child, that terrified me. I don't want to get taken by stick people because I want to play outside and play hide and seek with all my cousins and my brothers. And it didn't really come full circle until I reached womanhood, until I went off to college. And I understood what she was talking about then. And to me, that's what she was really talking about from that childhood lens to now was MMIW. And I started to realize, what those legends meant when I was young to now. Do you have any similar legends that you were told when you were younger, or do you were you told about stick people growing up from your grandparents?
Yeah, and even hearing it, we're told, like, in our family, like, we don't even mention them. It's almost like calling them. And there's a lot of different teachings about, different worlds and parallel universes, or, well, that might not be the right word, parallel universe. That seems so bougie native or something. I'm not that person. It seems there's different teachings about things that are around us, and having a respect for the resources or beings or people that are here, significantly focused on what will help our lives or what we might be in danger of, along with, yes, I agree, all the different social and violence against natives that exists. I think there is some fear out there in our tribe about what can happen to our women. I think there are I look at my girls and I think about that they are living and existing in a world where we talk about this in public. We talk about MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women, in public. We have elected officials that address it and speak on the House floor or Senate floor about it. I did not grow up in that world. I grew up in a world where that was whispered about, where we drove by an area where a woman was taken and it was like whispered about, and it never really fully sat right with me. I always thought, like, why is justice not equal for us. Like, I just, I remember being at their age. I remember being in elementary school, like filing that away and thinking like, this is not going to be the way it is. And then you grow up and you're hardened a little bit by the reality that people just aren't aware. They aren't aware that there's a different judicial system for Native women. There's a different even alert system for Native women that go missing. We can't even have access to who our Native women are missing on the Yakama Reservation. We have the most, according to one federal database, which there are different things to be said about that, but according to one federal database, there are 56 missing Native women in Washington state. 20 of those are missing from the Yakama Reservation. What are their names? Who are they? How can we post up on a flyer? Where's the board that has that name or list? The public does not have access to that. As a community member, as a fellow Yakama, as a Native woman that's living in the area where all these Native women are missing, we do not have access to that by law. And I continually go back to this younger self and think, why? So it's a good question. I mean, I think there are, to address the fears that are out there and to address, what are the dangers.
Right. I mean, I think you bring up sort of the, I guess, non-impartial way of the judicial system. Me growing up in the city, I went off to DC after graduating from Evergreen with my bachelor's, and I had my own experiences there and going through the judicial system and having that experience. And, it's rare that, I actually won my case, going through the circuit court system in Maryland State, and my abuser, found guilty by the jury on all charges. And then, I go through all that. It takes a year to prosecute my abuser, but he still, gets left off the hook, the judge, right? There's so many, first, the first barrier is law enforcement, making sure they get the facts. Then the next barrier is getting the facts to the prosecutor and being strong enough to be resilient through that experience and work through it with my prosecutor, who I felt was, prejudiced. And it's he's supposed to be on my side, but it doesn't feel like it. And then we go through court and it's I feel like I'm representing myself because, I'm away from home. I don't have any friends or family to be there in the courtroom with me. And then for my prosecutor to act a certain way. And then, you go through all of that. And then you hope, my hope was to see that this person would serve jail time. But it's this system is set up to allow crime to continue. The system is set up for victims to carry this harm, and it's so unfair. And I that's why I sort of kind of came back to Washington. This is why I came back to my home. This is why I chose to get my MPA, so I could understand the system from a wider lens, and why that experience happened to me in the way that it did, and why was it unfair. So I came back with this hunger to understand, to really comprehend why the system is set up the way that it is. And I started to attend MMIW marches. There wasn't very many MMIW marches in the DC area. So that, that was also part of the identity issue that I was dealing with. But when I came back, I was much more involved, and there was much more Native women that I could resonate with, that I could gain healing with. And that's where I kind of met Abigail Echo Hawk. I heard her speak at the Seattle Women's March in 2018. And some of the things that she said that stuck with me. One of them was, if we try to fight alone, we are not strong. If we fight together, we create a fist. And that totally, just hit me a certain way, because when I was out in DC, I was fighting alone. I was by myself. I was I was just one finger standing up trying to, face all these people in this courtroom by myself, you know, so I was weak. I was weak. At the end of the day, I was weak. But then to hear her say that and come back, you know, around other Native women and to hear their stories and to be around my people again, I felt stronger, you know, like I felt much more, I guess, sure of myself, or I guess it was better for me and my health to come back home and gain this wisdom and be around other Native women who can speak to these issues, because that was absent before when I was in DC. But again, like, come back, I had to gain that experience. I had to understand, you know, the importance of my culture, the importance of following the right people. But yeah, that's sort of been my motivation and why I chose to get my MPA, and what kind of, you know, allowed me to find this path. You know, because of her work, I was able to get accepted into the Evergreen State College with the issues, like with the passions about MMIW policy. And then from there, you know, I was led to your work and I saw your work in publications online. I was like, wow, she's Yakama. So, you know, it's crazy how things just kind of come full circle, and how your education can really impact sort of your lived experiences, and how it impacts more, you know, more people in your family, your reservation, things like that. So I guess, Emily, my next question is, how did you get involved academically with MMIW?
Well, first of all, I want to just kind of respond to something that you said about, you know, being a victim of violence, or that process where you had to go through to prosecute. I mean, it takes a lot to do that. I mean, I was on the phone until like 1 a.m. last night texting somebody that has just been through an experience. And, you know, you think about how much questioning comes up with somebody that has been through an act of violence for Native women. And you think about, you know, that support network. And I'm really sorry that you had to go through that and it felt alone. And I know that your feelings are genuine about feeling weak because you didn't have your tribe with you and your people along with you, but that takes so much to be able to go through and face those things and to have a year-long prosecution. So many Native women don't get that. And they can't get to that point because it's so hard. And so I just want to take a moment and just kind of almost exhale. I feel like I was holding my breath when you were talking, because it's just such a emotional process. And I'm so sorry that that happened to you. You know, so I guess what brought me to this point academically, when I was 18 years old, I was asked to run for Miss Yakama Nation, which I as well would have been classified as the tomboy in our family. My mom makes a joke that I went to the ER more times than all my siblings combined growing up. And most of the time, I actually didn't break a bone until like a year ago. But it was just a check to make sure it was just a sprain, check to make sure it wasn't a neck fracture. Like, I think about all the things that my parents threw. So the other surprising thing that I put my parents through is that an elder from the tribe asked me to run for Miss Yakama Nation, and that was a really big shock to them. And as well as me, you know, and I went forward and did it. I think that there can be so much strength that's gained when somebody believes in you. From there, I ran for Miss National Congress of American Indians, the largest policy organization in the United States for Natives, and I won that. And when I won, I was in California, Palm Springs, on the Agua Caliente tribe was hosting, and the FBI approached me. I know it seems so weird to like have these experiences on reservation where it's like whispered, like, this, your jurisdiction is different. You know, you have to always be careful. You always have to be careful 10 times more than other people because we have different systems here. And So it was a very different experience to be approached by the FBI and be asked to be in a fashion show to help raise money for the effort of missing women. And I was really shocked by that, about how it all kind of came together. I guess one of the vendors was in this area in Washington or something. So it just happened to be so many different people knew and was connected to this that lined up to me doing that. And I never really heard about that. I never really knew where that effort went, but I just kind of jumped in and thought, well, there's somebody out there doing something. And you talk about that in classes. You talk about that in policy classes. I remember talking about that when I was in community college at Yakama. And people were so confused by it. And I remember 3 years later, one of the white classmates came up to me and was like, remember how obsessed you were about serial killers or about different violence? And he laughed. And at that moment, I thought, oh my gosh, he has no idea the violence and the rates that Native women face. And so it feels like there's these times and periods where you kind of go back into silence. It feels like there's these times and periods where the effort to build awareness is so great that you feel alone in it. And I think this is, the way that a lot of families have felt over the years about their missing loved ones, only having bits and pieces of information about the cases. So when I didn't study or focus on MMIW as much when I had the MPA at Evergreen. I was actually after I graduated, I saw an Evergreen grant, and I had just been going through paperwork because somebody had just broken into our home, and I was having to submit all of the paperwork to the insurance. And at that point, I didn't know who it was. At that point, they had pointed a gun at my husband. And it was this act of violence that your emotions are so heightened. And at that moment, I had found a historical account of the Yakama War. And I was given this by a Yakama language teacher. It was in our language of the historical account. And I've read it periodically over the years. And when I read it this time while I was going through this experience, something just made me want to look more into the history of the violence of Native women. When did it start? And when I started looking at why the Yakama War started from Western civilization or white historians, they didn't focus on the fact that Native women and children were killed and raped by white miners. They focused on the justice that our Yakamas put forward as a result of that violence towards our Native women. And the government response to our Native women being raped and killed was a 3-year war. And so I just I submitted the grant. I said, I want to do a visual for this. I'm a visual learner. If I get it, I'll share this with the world. I'll share it with everybody. If I don't, then I'll continue to kind of just process this silently. And so I did this alongside, actually looking for the person and trying to help solve my own crime, find who it is, and all of those things. And I never really fully revealed that publicly until my case study was published a few months ago. So it's going to come as a shock to people that, I had a stalker, and the stalker made their way into my home, and it wasn't actually prosecuted for stalking. And yet, continued to increase the level of violence that they had imparted on different women throughout for years. I mean, I think they're in jail right now for violence against women. And so for me, it's been a parallel process of reviewing history and present day things. I gained strength from history, knowing that we're still here despite everything. I gained strength from thinking about, our relatives that were alive in that time, that were praying for somebody to one day be able to have the voice, have the resources, be able to speak in this, English language at a level where people would listen to us and understand our message and who we are and what we fight against.
Yeah, exactly. To your point, just about the lived experiences that our grandparents incurred, like they were talking about 1950s and beyond. That was an era where, assimilation was very strong, where assimilation was, the goal of the federal government. And then it wasn't until the late 1900s where different federal laws started to change, and tribal sovereignty became more of a thing, an understood concept. And then now, fast forward to 2020, like you said before, your daughters are aware of MMIW. When before, me growing up, we never talked about this sort of thing. It was very just, I don't know, it was too uncomfortable to talk about at the kitchen table. It was just something that girls should know and should stay away from. But to now, when we're talking about MMIW, when we're talking about federal law, state law, it's a concept that has to be understood from the very beginning. And I think that piece is sort of still misunderstood by a lot of legislators for some reason, which I'm still kind of frustrated with. It's like, how do you not understand why we are the way we are? Like, because of federal law, assimilation laws. Like, to me, it's just a huge contradiction issue with policy that we're trying to create now versus policy in 1920 when things were very prejudiced, very racist. And so, I'm trying to understand this in a way that we can move forward in a, I guess, shared responsibility. Because it's very complex. I've heard this saying by Muhammad Ali. It's like we're all from his community, the Black community. We're all Black people, but we're all trying to fight the same fight, but we're all getting bit by the same dog. But we all want to approach this with different approaches. Like, one person wants to approach it from an airplane. One person wants to approach it from their sailboat. One person wants to approach it from underground. One Black man wants to approach it with the white man. But we're all Black people with these different approaches getting bit by the same dog. I kind of feel like that's the same thing here with MMIW. It's like there's so many different perspectives, interpretations, and angles that we sit at, and none of us are wrong for having our approach. None of us are wrong from like where we're located, but we're all Native people, and we're all kind of getting harmed by the same enemy. And I feel like that's apparent now, and I just feel like having this experience in the MPA program, I feel like, honestly, being frank, I feel like we should approach this in a way sort of like how my grandfather did with CRICFIT, with the Columbia River Intertribal Committee. Like how these tribes come together. There's 4 different tribes that come together to discuss policy. Like, can we kind of transfer that same collaboration when we're talking about MMIW? And I'm sure that there's been events like this before, but like where tribes, all Washington tribes sit at a table and discuss all of the issues that their tribes are facing. And one by one, we just sit at the table and like hear each other's perspectives, hear each other's current issues, and sort of come up with ideas together as Native people. Is that like, that's just how I feel like I would like to see MMIW being discussed. What are your thoughts about that theory?
Well, I mean, I think you see different, there's a lot to unpack there, but which are good points. I think that sorry, I'm trying to formulate this so it's a little bit coherent rather than just like word vomiting everything out. So, yeah, at an organizational level, I think, each tribe has sovereignty. Each tribe has, federally recognized tribe has their own set of government, their own ways that their membership approves things, their way that their elected officials conduct their day-to-day business or matters of great importance. And, it can be difficult to figure out how to coordinate all of that. I think there are different mechanisms that help streamline that. Resolutions at a tribe level, for example, can go to a regional level, then can go to a national level, and just show support of other tribes for this one tribe resolution. I think that's one of the mechanisms and pieces in process right now. Somebody mentioned earlier, Abigail Echohawk has, I believe, helped with that process, and her team at Urban Indian Health Institute has helped with different resolutions at a regional level. Definitely helped with federal policy level as a result of her and her team's research papers. I'm such a fangirl of her, so that's why I had to kind of pause, because I knew we just kind of go on and on and on. She's somebody definitely that really impacted my viewpoints in a lot of ways as well. We also have different leadership and elected tribal officials that are in a system that's outside of tribes. So, for example, Seattle City Council has a Blackfeet Native woman that actually has court experience in Yakama tribe.
Right.
We have different elected officials at the state levels, different elected officials that are natives at the federal level. Yet there's still this aspect of like, how much power do you have in those systems? We've never had a native, as I think so many different news sources are saying, we've never had a Native American member on cabinet. And could this be the administration, this incoming administration, where that changes? I think that it's really hyper focused on, what is possible. And I think that there are always ways and times that I sit and think that what I did today was not enough. It was not enough for this woman. It was not enough for this family. How can I help more? How can I cultivate this more? How can I streamline this more for them?
Right.
And then I also think of how far we've gotten and different things that are in place in ways that we hear this now. Like, I never thought that I would hear a farmer that came to be a 4th District congressional representative hold a poster of a woman that was killed on the Yakama Reservation and advocate for a law change and basically cross the aisle with different people and show that, this is not a divisive issue. This is an issue that Democrats or Republicans need to support. And as a co-sponsor, being a Republican from our area, he really helped lead that in the House of Representatives. Just very hard to do in this time, to advocate for Native women. I mean, sometimes he was talking to a kind of empty room. But no matter who was there, he was pushing it so that he could post it on YouTube so that it could be shared out. Like, I try to find those little light in the world that shows that people care.
Yeah, that really that sparked a memory for me, because I'm looking at Washington state laws, and I really have this perspective of natives being in politics. I don't see myself participating in politics. I don't see myself participating on tribal council. So I'm sort of, I feel like my strengths lie within the legal side, possibly being a lawyer in the future, and kind of still remaining solo, but also having the power to represent my tribe when it comes to, I guess, legal cases. So that's sort of my narrative, how I see the political arena. But, okay, where did I want to go with this? So I'm talking about state laws. Like, that's my understanding of Washington law, federal law, as a Native woman, as a single individual. But when I saw your Central Washington University MMIW presentation. That was like a light for me, you know, just seeing your work on YouTube and seeing these representatives, Gina Mossbrucker, Robert Udall, and then the Yakama Nation Tribal Chair from the Law and Order Committee, Lottie Sam. You know, those were people I've never heard speak on this issue at a college institution. You know, that to me, that was just like mind blowing, because I'm like, why isn't this being shared on more college institutions? Like, this is a major crisis. Like, Washington State, according to Abigail Alcohawk's like study, like Seattle is number 1 for MMIW cases, then Tacoma is number 2, and it's like I literally live 20 minutes away from Tacoma. Like, I'm thinking about these things, and I'm like, why isn't this presentation being heard more throughout Washington? Like, but no, like, to kind of go back to the presentation, I heard Yakama County Sheriff Robert Udall speak. And at first I was kind of like, you know, he's law enforcement. I had like kind of like this wall up, this skepticism, like hearing him speak at first. But then as he sort of progressed in his speech, you know, I had this respect for him at the end, this sort of like this trust, like he is a good person working alongside the Yakama Nation. So yeah, you know, just having that demonstration to look at, it really does help me kind of let my walls down when it comes to alliances or trusting law enforcement, because that's my own like lived experiences, right? Like, I didn't have a good experience with law enforcement, so like when I see a law enforcement officer or sheriff, you know, representing, you know, his department at an MMIW presentation, I just was kind of shook by that, to be honest. What was that? Like, how did you put this presentation together, or like, how did this Central Washington presentation come about? Like, and how can we be more involved about this?
The Law and Justice Department at Central Washington University, really, they give a focused talk every year and bring in different speakers. So this year, you know, that year that you're talking about, they chose to focus on missing and murdered indigenous women. And it's the one important point here about systems and what exists and where are they at. The Central Washington University Law and Justice Program is huge in terms of the amount of officers that are going to go right into the field. So to be able to access and have that and speak to that and speak to them, so that their first experience isn't somebody that's a victim of violence. It's, you know, hearing it from, you know, this panel of different speakers and people, what meant a lot. I wanted to see how we could be a part of that learning and education experience. I think it's a good question, because there's so many different aspects about, you know, how do we put this in an arena where it's a learning environment or an opportunity to educate people, and not necessarily a divisive like thing, which sometimes it has to be a device. It's like there's hard lines drawn and it's like, where do you stand? Yeah, those conversations have to happen sometimes, but I really like the flow of educational environments. And all of that kind of came together because I continue to volunteer and network with people at Central, which I also, you know, graduated my bachelor's with. I continue to be on different volunteer boards. And so that really helped streamline a lot of that, to the point where we had a small memorial service for that was also on campus, that wasn't filmed for any family members. We actually got permission from the Urban Indian Health Institute to post the portions of their report that Abigail co-wrote. You know, so it was a huge printout. They reformatted it for us. I hadn't met Abigail at that point, and you just go and you ask people things, and you just kind of wait and wonder if they'll say no, which I'm told no or wait quite a bit. And somehow I managed to pick myself up, because it's not just about me. And I think it goes back to your earlier point about, being community orientated, even when you're away from home, is so central to our value system. And I continue to go back to that to gain strength, to know that, like, I'm not just asking Abigail or Urban Indian Health Institute for just me. I'm asking it for all these other people. And so that I can at least say I tried. And so a lot of different people that organized that event approached it that way. We didn't have a budget for this. We didn't have anything, that connected beyond just people wanting to bring this issue forward and give more information about it. And Representative Mossbrucker, hadn't been previously involved in this issue. She basically heard about the issue and blinked and went and wrote some bills about it. Are there some different things that could have existed? Is there different aspects in ARENA? Sure, but show me another legislator that has done that since 1855. She's the only one. So she was the first one in all of that time period. And Sheriff Udall actually is married to a Native woman.
Yeah, I saw that from Umatilla.
It's so random. Whenever I think there's some knowledge or awareness that is personal there that I wasn't aware of either. And I think it is important to try to have reference points for people to be able to research this issue. It's a lot for families to have to give updates or to try to share updates because we're not hearing it enough from law enforcement or prosecutors. And I continue to think about what would happen if we had that voice, if we had this authoritarian voice or this prosecutor voice or these different people that were actually in charge of the cases, like the FBI, addressing each case and even if they can't give specifics because they don't want to compromise the case, saying we're on it. Believe me, we're on it. We're doing everything we can. I mean, we haven't had that. Those families haven't had that reassurance. And that's the part that continues to kind of just have me toss and turn at night, thinking, how can we make a better system that exists like that? Because right now the federal government does not comment on active cases. They don't comment on active cases to the press. So families are left not being sure of where the status is, where their case is with their loved one, they kind of just a lot of times feel like it's just nobody cares. And that's the point that just hurts to hear about and to think about. And so, yeah, having events like the Central event, it's like maybe we're planting these little seeds in future prosecutors and future detectives and future law enforcement that's going to say, like, what, this is not enough. We're going to try better. We're going to do more. Because what we're doing right now is, yes, the bare minimum that we need to do. But remembering that talk, remembering Mossbrucker or Udall or Emily, what can I do to try better? And I think it's just going to take that. Because we don't necessarily have the resources to do more. It's going to be each individual person pulling something that they have to offer into this effort of decreasing these numbers, of finding these women, of solving these cases.
I feel like to your point about like Native women's cases not being followed up on, or not, law enforcement or the FBI, whoever has jurisdiction over this case, them not informing the families or the victim themselves, that piece is very important, and that's a piece that's not being filled. And with my own personal experience in Maryland, and me reporting my abuser to the police, there was a lot of missed facts along the way. And that's another issue. It's like law enforcement not having all the facts when it's so crucial and it's so important. And like the timing, like I feel like the first 24 hours are the most important because that's when the facts are there. And the longer the time goes by, the more facts are being lost, the more evidence that's being lost. And for me as a individual seeing this happen and knowing like the longer that law enforcement sits on this case, the more that harms me. And I took a risk on myself. I had to believe in myself because it's my life. At the end of the day, it's my life. And it's not law enforcement's job to, well, I guess it is their job to protect me, but at the end of the day, are they going to do that? I don't think so. So like, I had to come with that realization, like, no one's coming to save me. Law enforcement's not going to find my abuser. Like, I had this belief already from the beginning that I'm on my own. And that's really crappy, you know, to have a narrative like that. But I went on Facebook Live and told what happened to me that day. Like, this is what happened. This is what he looks like. You know, Target Corporation let my abuser go from the store. Like, I just totally put my information out there, which, you know, they told me not to do. You know, the Maryland State Police told me not to do that because that's going to jeopardize the case. But, you know, I took that risk anyway. And I felt like in my heart that was the right thing to do, because there's this abuser out there just walking around. Like, you don't know where he's going. So I chose to do that. And because I did that, other women stepped forward. Like, that happened to me too. Or that happened to me at that store too. And like a week later, somebody turned him in. I believe it was a family member. Like, they created an anonymous Facebook account with an anonymous name and like sent in pictures, sent in his name, his address, you know, the name of his wife. Like, somebody out there anonymously turned him in because they saw my Facebook Live story. Like, is that something law enforcement could have done? No. Like, if I would have not done that, I don't feel like law enforcement would have found him, because they didn't have a license plate to go off of. They didn't have a Maryland state ID to go off of. They had like a fuzzy picture of him walking out of the store. That's it. So I took that risk. And because I did, you know, people started to come forward. The general public started to come forward and give data, right? Like, that's also an important key when it comes to cases, is people around who you don't know have information, and for them to bring it forward at a critical time. And so I feel like that's a flaw with these cases, right? It's like, what information is out there and who has it? And I kind of heard that with Robert Udall's storytelling in his presentation, how someone's case gets sit on for 40 years, and over time it's just like their body's found 40 years later. Like, how's that justice? That's a big loss. So I don't know. Like, I guess I'm going on a tangent right now about law enforcement systems and how it's not meeting the needs of Native women in critical times. And I just feel like from a law enforcement lens, like, this is the issue, is, I guess, problem solving or gaining the facts, or like going to the right steps. I don't know, but that's just sort of my frustrations with the systems in place now, and why I choose to share my story to platforms like this, because I feel like stories aren't heard enough. Also, that's another thing. I feel like there's so many women out there who are listening to us, who gain healing from this, who gain power from this, who also know that, like, wow, that girl took a risk. That girl spoke up about what she's going through, and this was her outcome. I feel like other stories should be heard as well, but that's just me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's definitely some things that you mentioned that correlate with what's going on out there. I mean, I think the aspect of utilizing social media to get out a message and pertinent information to then pass along to law enforcement is something that, you know, different journalists are doing. Billy Jensen, who works on different cases as a journalist in that way, does that method. You know, he's not necessarily the victim of it. He searches on behalf of victims for different people, does Facebook ads, shares the videos, and then passes information along. And he's created a whole different people throughout the nation that just volunteer their time or just try to, you know, give information. He's not always successful in helping get information to solve cases, but he's kind of helped coin a term or give more leverage to the community that does this, so they call themselves like citizen detectives or citizen sleuths. And so the process that you're doing is is incredible, or that you did, because it's people have seen success with that in some other cases. The other aspect that you bring up about the weight that is on victims of crime is correct. I think and with law enforcement, there's so many things that have to line up in order to help solve a case. And if those things all don't line up in the right way, the prosecutor might not take it. The prosecutor might not take this charge or that charge. And my victim impact statement was super long. It was really super duper long. I think the Toppenish police, so even though the crime that was committed on reservation, the Toppenish police were investigating it, and they said it is the most detailed and longest victim impact statement they had ever read in their entire career. That was the detective that said that, and I think he'd been on the force like 15 or 20 years. And I was just like, but this was the reason. You go to what you know in times of duress sometimes, if you're able to, and you go and you try everything you can so that it doesn't happen to somebody else. And that's the place I went to when I was writing that up and typing the detail. And this is specifically why the case was able to be solved, because the item that somebody ended up trying to sell somebody else was specifically in my victim's impact statement. Numerous items. So then they could go back to that person and find the eventual person. And if that wasn't in there, if that wasn't documented, if that wasn't submitted on time, even as it was like bawling my eyes out, having to travel 4 hours to go give a keynote in Spokane right after, even if, there were so many different things that could have prevented me from doing that. Could have delayed it and had me make it shorter. But I kept going back to the fact, like, I have to utilize the tools that are a part of the system. I have to work the system to try to do everything I can to prevent this from happening to somebody else. And the horrible aspect is it didn't stop him. He got his first felony as a result of that, his first felony conviction. The judge allowed us to tell him off in court. And he, his next crime, I think, was to shoot at cops in an alleyway. So as a felon, he wasn't allowed to have a firearm. He did. And then the crime, a few years after that, let's see, maybe like a year and a half ago, we were turning, and the way that we were turning, he was walking diagonally. So he was walking in a really weird diagonally across the parking lot in dark clothes. And our car turned, and we had to brake really fast, and my husband was like, "Oh my God, that's him." Within that week, he had raped a woman.
Wow.
And so you go back to these things, and I have immense guilt about that. Like, did I not do enough? Did I, but you go back to this point of like, I did everything I could to try to prevent that from happening to a woman who lives, 2 or 3 streets away. And it validated the fact that I was right. I had recognized that he had asked me some weird question a few weeks before he had came into our house, and I thought, he has been following me. He is stalking me. I identified that behavior. I identified with what he is capable of. And if he gets away with this, and if that's not put on there, he will gravitate and increase his crimes. I knew it. And it validated when it happened to the woman. It scared and terrified me. I still have guilt over there. Like, what else could I have done to hopefully try to prevent that from ever happening to somebody else? And I will continue to revisit that probably for the rest of my life.
I think this is a topic that goes to show that colonialism and the Anglo-American system of justice is not justice. It's completely unjust. And it's completely aimed to protect the criminal. It's aimed to protect the white man who can continue to harm women. And it's so sickening because, like, I'm reading laws that have happened all the way back to the 1600s and how, like, court systems back then have allowed this to continue. And even now it's still continuing. And it's like, we have to prove that what we're saying is true. Like, I hate the quote, like, innocent until proven guilty. Like, How about no, you're guilty until proven innocent? Like, I think it should be inverse. And one thing that I just learned this year, I'm sort of going back to the early 1600s and kind of understanding how Native people conducted law within their own tribes. And one thing that I want to share with you, Emily, it's from, I don't know how to pronounce this tribe's name, but I'll try my best. It's called, I think it's Muskoke tribe. They were required by the federal government to put their laws into writing. And this was around rape law. And this is what they put down. And be it farther enacted, if any person or person should undertake to force a woman and do it by force, it shall be left to a woman what say punishment should she be satisfied with, to whip or pay what she say it be law. And I'm like, that's the Native perspective of law. Like, wow. Like, should a member of the tribe or any person of that matter force a woman or coerce a woman or rape a woman, like, it's the woman's word that is valued over the criminal or the abuser. It's like we had this inverse narrative when it came to punishment, when it came to prosecution. Like, whatever the woman says your punishment should it be death? Should it be, what do you call it? Abolishment? It's just like women's values were highly represented when it came to these sort of cases and these sort of prosecution processes. It's just like these two different legal systems were completely different. And it's like, I wish this could come forward somehow. And this is from a book called The Beginning and End of Rape by a Native lawyer. Her name's Sarah Deer. And what she does in this book, she talks about Native American legal systems before the arrival of the American Anglo system, and like how these sort of cases were put forward in the tribe. And it's just like, today it's not like that at all. I wish it was more, I don't know. I wish today the system wasn't set up for us to fail. At the end of the day, it's set up for us to like not win our case. Like, all cards are against us when it comes to like prosecuting somebody. Even like when we know something's not right, even though we present these facts to the prosecutors, law enforcement, whoever, it's just like, it's just an unfair system. And
yeah, I think I agree. With regards to the aspect, Sarah Deer is amazing. If you haven't, yeah, I agree. I'm glad you referenced her book, The Beginning and End of Rape. She is from Muskogee, which also had a Supreme Court case that the tribe had recently, McGirt. And I think the historical aspects of how cases were set up or protected or not protected as natives through those laws is very important, and it's very touchy. Our first MMIW cases from the Yakama tribe were reported in 1855. It went to, the one that started the war was reported to the U.S. government, which they said, we're going to start a 3-year war. The next set of cases, which was in the Fort Vancouver area, went to the president, to Congress. They still have not had any real response to those reports. 1855, over 165 years, and it's like, we're a shrug. The little shrug emoji, like, it's hard not to like have that harden your soul and to just like not even be willing to accept help from anybody that's a part of those systems, because you've had 165 years to address this, to fix this, to, correct this, and it's taken this long. But at the same time, I continue to reference that, like, these are our receipts. These are, you've had this information. And when we even look back to laws and legal systems and how it's set up and designs to work either for us or against us, yeah, we can see that when they found gold, in Washington, Governor Stevens, the territorial governor, went through and had a process for people that were white settlers to have claims for damages by Indians. However, the treaties at that time, even though they were signed, they were not ratified. So whose law ran our reservation lands? Whose law ran the lands of our territories if this was not an agreed upon exchange of land for other services? Isn't our laws and rules still held up? Which is the question. And our laws and rules about rape and murder were very clear. We would take care of it and make sure it wouldn't happen to anybody else. Mm-hmm. And so, to look and see, like, he set it up and designed that system to work against Natives, to work against violence towards Native women. And at the, if it helped streamline the extraction of resources and even, remove more Natives from the land or break their hearts, then so be it. I continually think how this impacts Native men today. When we're punished with a 3-year war by the federal government for protecting our women, and you read most white historians write about that, how awful and bloodthirsty these Natives were. They just wanted to have war. Yeah, you do think, like, what is the message that's passed along to our Native men, to our Native boys, to actually our Native women, to help stand and protect with the other ones? Because we had Native women that fought in the war as well. So these are all different dynamics, that get brought up or come up.
Right. And another law that, we can talk about is PL 280 and how, it contradicts justice in tribal communities. And, I've heard you speak a lot about that in some of your presentations, and it's like, you prompted us to do our homework about what is PL 280. So I went ahead and did that. And this is what I got back by definition from what I learned in my last course called Tribal Crime and Justice. And PL 280 state courts, this basically allows state courts to assume criminal and civil jurisdiction over Indians within Indian country without tribal consent. And so it's this, in short, it means not allowing us to have the power to prosecute criminals who, rape our women, who create felony level crimes on the reservation. Whether they be Native or non-Native, we don't have jurisdiction over that case. So it's like we have limited power when it comes to crime and solving crime and receiving justice from these crimes on the reservation. And to me, that's a huge contradiction issue when it comes to Indian policy at a federal level. It's like they always say they respect our tribal sovereignty. These white men in blue suits say they respect, Native culture. They respect our tribal sovereignty, but they're not going to get involved. But yet they have these laws in place that keep them involved, and PL 280 being one of them. So it's just like, that's a huge frustration that I see that's going on presently. But yeah, I guess I want to sort of discuss that, further. Like, what is your perspective, Emily, about jurisdiction on the Yakama Reservation?
Well, I think that my last case that was solved and brought before was through Toppenish City Police. So I see the benefits of, I pay taxes on my house even though it's on a reservation. I believe I should be able to utilize whatever jurisdictional system with flexibility. I should be able to utilize whatever jurisdictional system that's streamlining this process for me and where detectives are on it. And in that case, it was the city. That because of PL 280 now, it makes it more difficult to address and solve crimes now. Because our tribe doesn't necessarily have everything set up and in process. I was on a jury trial for the Yakama tribe. I don't know if you've ever got a jury notice or served on a jury. But, if in looking at some of our laws, we weren't able to to set a decision based on what the prosecutor was asking, the way that the law and order was written. And this law and order is pretty streamlined and standard in other jurisdictions and avenues. So it was really confusing to know that this seemed like an obvious thing. Because our law and order code seemed to be outdated in this parameter, we couldn't vote to convict because we had to follow what the law was on the books. We had to make a decision and a determination based on that. We're behind as a tribe in terms of those processes and jurisdiction. Are we behind because it was taken away from us? Yeah, but we should be able to have a system of court system that's set up that has a lot of different parameters in there and in place if we're truly going to operate the way that we ideally want to, and we don't have that. We just don't. And so if that means a delay of case, if that means a delay of justice, I would rather go through the county in that way. If it means that it's going to be faster, if it means that there's going to get a conviction, yeah, go through the county for it. So it's a complicated issue. I think one of the bigger law firms in the state, native law firms, Galanda Broadman, is actually prosecuting one of the cases for with the Yakama Nation about PL 280. And it's very difficult to watch them fight this law and hear them almost invalidate what Native women have been saying and what our even own public safety order said as a tribe. So in this case that I'm talking about, that I don't know if it's an appeal or not, or if they're appealing it, the tribe is basically moving to, Yakama tribe, for whatever reason, is moving to reverse a rape conviction and in Klickitat County, and then in another instance, moving to say that Toppenish City does not have the right to prosecute tribal members that stole a vehicle from the city of Toppenish. And it's like, why are these the cases, number one, that we're fighting against? Mm-hmm. Number two, why is it just doesn't make sense to me, knowing the amount of cases that are out there that impact Native women, that the tribe doesn't seem to be throwing their weight behind and being advocating and hiring Gabe Galandig to go fight it. You know, and so when I hear that law firm in court saying the Yakama Nation absolutely does not have a public safety issue on the reservation, I am floored. And I've asked him repeatedly about this. I've asked him repeatedly, why are you trying to reverse a rape conviction? As a Yakama tribal member, it's not clear to me. I don't need to know the names necessarily. It just, what is the information about this case that could clarify why we would put a victim of that crime back through a process where it looks like a whole tribe is trying to reverse that? That's not cool with me. That doesn't fly with me. That's not, I have questions about it, and he's refused to answer. I've asked him nicely on Facebook. I've asked him nicely on Twitter. I've showed that video. There's a recording of them saying that, and I still am confused by it. So it's like, so in order for us to amp up our PL 280, we have to ignore all these victims of violence throughout the time. We have to ignore our own tribe issuing this order that says we have a public safety issue. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do too. It's an understanding that I just haven't gotten yet, and it's something I continue to ask questions about and network with people, like, to, I guess, gain clarity about it, because it's, like you said, it's just something that's not being talked about or kind of brushed under the rug. But yeah, there's other topics that I feel this way about, and there's other laws that I feel this way about, and the other one being the Indian Civil Rights Act and the VAWA Act. Like, I feel like the Indian Civil Rights Act is sort of another law put in place by the federal government to control us, to have this hierarchical power over us. But then they create the VAWA Act. I'm not sure who exactly created that law, or that policy, but I feel like that's the only policy in place today. I know it's currently being currently in Congress, but that is the only policy that's impacted me individually, that's allowed me to visit other reservations, that has allowed me to be heard in certain arenas because of the VAWA Act. That funding has been available to certain tribes, and because that funding is available, it allows for speakers like me to come and visit. And when I come and visit, I get to speak to victims of crime and share my story and share my knowledge around these issues in Indian country. So that is one policy that I do applaud, but I don't understand why it's a continuous fight to keep policies like that in place. But then other ones that harm us, obviously stay in place. That's where I'm frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with speaking to the issue and asking those hard questions. I asked numerous people that were applauding, different House of Representatives, the Pelosi, for doing things. And I think I continue to ask the question, why isn't she moving on Savannah's Act? Why isn't she, why is she recessing? Sorry, the door is opening. I'm going to pause for a second.
Sure.
Well, I don't know why I didn't realize it was so squeaky. Holding his breath, looking. It's a good. It could have been a good background noise for that really helped tie in the content. But anyway, when Ivanka Trump went out and announced that there was going to be MMIW cold case offices in 7 different states, she was criticized because it's where has she been? She hasn't been involved in this. Why are there war bonnets that are super duper close to the floor and not being worn? Why do they seem like a prop? There were so many people that were very critical about it. And I kind of shared that, okay, where is this coming from? I mostly had questions about it, but some people were very angry about her kind of inserting herself into this system that she hasn't seemingly or publicly cared about before it seemed like there was this whole election thing. And to me, I was like, well, where is Speaker Pelosi at? The bill for Savannah's Act is currently in her court, and she recessed it. How can we be super duper critical of Ivanka Trump doing these efforts, but yet not hold another elected official to the same standard?
Right.
And people do not want to answer my question. I asked different representatives about it. I asked and pointed that out numerous times. And it's well, it's politics. Well, you have these different, I'm like, no, nobody, no. I'm going to hold them both to the same standard. Speaker Pelosi more so because she's actually an elected official. I mean, Ivanka is just somebody that's representing that administration.
Right. She's not the one who's actually signing off on MMIW bills.
Yeah, she has the power to put the bill up and I guess it did cause people to hold their breath when I asked, but I'm like, I have to be the person that's going to ask these hard questions if we're going to start criticizing people and their roles and what they do or don't do. If we're going to have that conversation about people what they do or don't do in DC, it has to include why she's stalling or dragging her feet on this. Because it's so not cool. Savannah's Act is a bipartisan, largely supported. Why wasn't it up? And I think politically people are, I don't know if I would ever have a political career because I don't know that I would never not be able to call my party leaders out on when they're not doing stuff. I would be a crazy person that's if we go back to, our tomboy selves, telling off the pitcher in the middle of a game or something, we would look unsportsmanlike. But when people's lives are at stake, when people's safety is at stake, I'm going to be raising those questions. So I won't stop.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way when it comes to asking the hard questions or speaking up when no one else is, being that voice when we need to be, especially when it involves our communities and our sisters. And it's I did this whole, analysis of Donald Trump's Operation Lady Justice executive order last year, which to me is just Is it authentic? Is it genuine? And I feel like that's the same picture that people have of Ivanka Trump, just because of the name. Like, is she genuine? Is she here for good reason? Like, those are the sort of forefront prejudgment images that we have of this administration. Like, are they genuine people? Do they mean well when it comes to this crisis, this major crisis? And, I did this whole analysis, and I forwarded it to somebody who works for the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NamUs, right? Like, that's the federal level database that was created because of Savannah's Act, because of certain House bills in the state, to create a system for missing Native women. And I forwarded my policy brief to someone who works for NamUs. He's a research scientist. And, basically, in short, my policy brief was just a comparative analysis between tribal law enforcement on the Yakama Nation reservation versus, like, a city-funded police department. I used an example of Lacey because that's where I currently live, and I just compared, the funding, the allocations, the task forces, the number of employees serving their communities, the ratio to law enforcement officer, and the geographical differences, things like that, and put it all in order. And I sent it to this research scientist who works for NamUs, and he responded, and he goes, "I hope you had a good weekend." Or no, he goes, "Hi Nettie, I hope you've been well. I had the chance to read your memo. Unfortunately, I have to declare a conflict of interest, as I work for the National Missing and Identified Person System, NamUs. NamUs provides data and other support to Operation Lady Justice. That being the case, and given your final policy recommendation, it is impossible for me to be an impartial reader of your paper, given the link between my organization and Operation Lady Justice. However, thanks for reaching out, and I wish you the best moving forward in your studies." To me, I was just like, I was angry after reading this email, because it's just like, okay, you work for NamUs, you work for Operation Lady Justice, but here I am, a citizen of a tribe who's giving my recommendations or giving my grassroots perspective, and you just want to overlook it? Like, you're supposed to be on my team. Like, I don't understand that. Like, this is a federal level person, so it's just like, I don't understand why the people who are at the grassroots having these experiences aren't being heard with the people who are making these decisions. To me, it just kind of goes to show, like, you're not really helping us then. Like, you're not really on my team then. Like, there's just this distrust now between, like, me and my belief of Operation Lady Justice. And so when I saw Ivanka Trump there, because of Operation Lady Justice, I was one of those skeptical people. Like, I have this, I don't know, I feel like it's ingenuine in a way for politics, for clout, because of this email, because of the experience that I had trying to get in contact with people who work for that department.
Yeah, I mean, I think I continue to have questions about why the offices for Cold Case Task Force were selected the way that they were. You had mentioned earlier that Seattle is, the number one city in the United States for MMIW, urban city in the United States for MMIW. And so why you would think that a cold case task force office would be in that state? I mean, that just kind of goes to a streamlined approach to this, like an easy answer or working towards a solution, but they're not. And I wonder, like, why isn't Washington on that list? And then a few weeks ago, they announced that we're going to have a federal coordinator for the FBI. And I'm like, where did this position come from? Why is there a coordinator? What are they coordinating? Which tribes? Where are they based? I mean, there's so many questions that come as a result of all of this. And I continue to have those questions. I think my feelings about that exact same time that Pelosi was not moving on a bill there was a power dynamic. She had more power to move something forward than Ivanka did at that point. And I don't want to take away from people's anger or frustration about that. I mean, I'm equally confused about their offices and the reason why and things like that. But I still, when somebody is accountable for something and they're an elected official and they're not moving forward, get the farmer guy, white conservative elected representative, is the one that's going to bat for us, yet Pelosi's not moving as fast as I thought she should be. You know, there's an accountability aspect there. And that, to see her repeatedly not elevate it, really hurt. It really shows me where we fall with regards to her priorities. And that's hard. It's a really hard truth to face. And I honestly think that a number of us aren't willing to publicly state that to her. Not enough of us are.
Right.
You know, there are risks. I'm not in anything political, anything. I'm not looking for any political appointeeship. I'm not looking to be invited to any socially distant Zoom dinner with whatever administration, you know, so I don't have a risk there. Other people obviously have different risks that are involved there. And that was more my point about, like, I'm going to hold her accountable. I'm going to speak to it. But, you know, the other aspect of Operation Lady Justice that's interesting is, you know, that the fact that it did come under this administration, it didn't come under an Obama administration. It didn't come under a Clinton administration. It came under a Trump administration. That's the truth. Nobody else has brought it together, an effort at the federal level. Is it a scrappy effort? Is it something that we think could have been done more? Do we have questions about it? Yeah. But this is the first presidential administration that has moved forward on this. And I think it's really complicated and confusing to really sit with that.
Right. It is. It really is. Like, I watched the video of him signing off on it. And just the way Donald Trump speaks, it's like, he just comes from a place that you can't really, I don't know, take his actions for being authentic. I don't know. Just the way he signed off on it. He's like, this should have been done a really long time ago. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, just the way he talks sometimes, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy. But you're right. You know, this hasn't been done before. And it's like, it's kind of puzzling to see it happening in this way now by this president, who's shown to be apparently racist to people. So it's odd, really odd. But yeah, I know we've kind of been talking for almost 2 hours now. I guess we could like keep going and going.
Yeah.
So I guess I would like to ask one last question, and it's in regards to non-Indigenous alliances. I feel like that's also a key part to this discussion. I know me speaking, you know, in academia, on social media, this podcast, like there are non-Indigenous people out there who care about the issue, who, you know, want to be educated about what's going on. So from you, Emily, and, you know, the path that you've undergone, like what are some examples of alliances that you have with non-Indigenous friends about this topic?
So in my historical research about the Yakama War from the 1850s, it would have been easy for me to have a us versus them frame of mind. And I won't say that I don't go to that place sometimes. Mm-hmm. It wasn't ever enough for me. I couldn't stay in that place where it's us versus them. And so I started to wonder, like, what would it be like to meet descendants of the Yakama War on the other side? What were they told? What was their story? And so I, you know, reached out and did a call for descendants of the Yakama War. I've met descendants of the Yakama War. My family has met descendants of the Yakama War that fought against my ancestors, our ancestors. And, you know, we're pen pals. And it wasn't anything that I went forward on this path and like, was like, that's what I'm going to do. It just naturally kind of came forward. And the fact is that when I wanted to talk about the Yakama War, when I was researching or sharing, there was extreme level of interest from inside within the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Some with non-indigenous people. Because here I am, a Native woman, talking about the Yakama War. Not a lot of people wanted to hear that. They're used to hearing and seeing a white academic talking about it. Right. But when I started reaching out to these descendants and saying, will you stand by my side while I share our side of the story? Mm-hmm. You don't have to necessarily agree 100% with everything I'm saying or doing, but will you stand by my side and give space and hold space while I share this? And they said, yeah. And that's when you started to see different people picking up the story and started to really gravitating towards it and started really say, oh, wow, there were women that fought in the war. Oh, wow, the reason the war started was because of violence against women. I started to see history links add an additional little sentence about that. You start to see change. And so there are different little alliances along the way that have helped streamline and address this. In our local Yakama community, there's a number of different organizations that have asked me to speak or be a part of groups, community resource groups to try to address some of these dynamics. Speaking to like Rotary and different groups like that haven't ever really held space for Native voices, haven't ever really held space for Native women. And so when I think about the question about non-Indigenous alliances, it's like, what group are non-Indigenous people a part of, on boards, or network from? And have they ever heard from a Native woman speak about violence? Have they ever heard from a Native woman and invited them to speak about MMIW or even their story or what policy changes that they want? And if they haven't, maybe they need to have those conversations, because you and I can't network at every single one of these groups all the time, 365 days a year. It's going to rely on additional people creating and opening up those doors for us.
Right. And this kind of, reminds me of this question that you received from somebody at Central. They asked you, how do tribal communities address the stereotypes or prejudice that still exist between, law enforcement and other like public services? And, one thing that you said that really, just kind of opened my eyes or allowed me to have a better understanding of how to collaborate with people who may be prejudiced or who may have this, some people don't even know they are like kind of ignorant. They just, you don't know what you don't know. And you said something like, I hope I don't butcher your quote, but it's like when you have to sit back and ask yourself, like, when was the last time I had dinner with someone who was of another ethnicity? Have I ever had, a Indigenous person sit at my dinner table and share their perspective? And I was just like, wow, I've never even thought of it that way. How many different people of color or Caucasian people have I allowed into my home, to sit down and just have a discussion about, our, I guess, worldviews. So yeah, that's something that I thought was extremely intelligent and something I just have not thought about before. And now I'm going to think about that, as I continue to network and get to know people and talk about these issues.
Yeah, that came from, I was at some hotel and had a USA Today paper, and it was a survey on the back of the newspaper. So I never do that same thing where I thought about it like, oh, I guess. I mean, and then you start counting them off, like, oh, I had my father-in-law's white, my friend's Palauan and Nigerian. You don't want to make it a checklist, but you do want to continually broaden your horizons with understanding who people are and where they come from or their values.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But that wraps up this interview, Emily. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the great work that you do. And allowing younger scholars like me to ask you these curious questions. I know a lot of them were probably extremely long, but I do appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed this as well.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Great to be here.
Fight for every breath that she took that night. Now, mama, please hear my cries. Daughter, we hope that you're alive. May I have your attention for just a few minutes? I say what our women, but they be calm and I'm missing nobody watching, and they damn sure ain't gon' listen. So this is the mission, this is the vision. While the youth at the tripping suicidal prevention, wishing that the problems would just go away. But they ain't gon' go away. We just want our daughters home today. She is the earth, she is the sky, she is the life, yeah, yeah. She is the light, she is the star, she is the night, yeah, yeah. Sacred woman, yeah, yeah. Oh, I call you, yeah, yeah.